Om. Welcome to the video on Tantric sexuality. To begin with, it is important to say that I strongly uphold the values of non-harming and personal autonomy. And in regards to sexuality, I strongly believe that all sexual interactions between two or more people should be between consenting, fully informed adults. In addition, sexual relationships should have somewhat balanced power dynamics where there is not one person who is holding much more power in the relationship than the other person. For example, doctor-patient relationships, teacher-student relationships, things like this are imbalanced power dynamic situations where it is inappropriate for sexual connection to happen because there is too much potential for manipulation and abuse. And I strongly oppose all forms of abuse. Historically, there have been many diverse approaches to sexuality within different tantric traditions. Many forms of tantra are geared towards ascetics. Some of those ascetics are completely celibate. However, there were also a certain subset of tantric ascetics, especially pre-tantric ascetics, before tantra proper really took off, who were practicing asceticism not primarily for spiritual liberation, but primarily for siddhis, which are basically magical powers. So there were these ascetics, especially in certain groups like the Kapalikas and the Pashupatis, who would go and live in the cremation grounds and do these intense austerities in order to gain magical powers, the ability to transform reality. And some of their practices involved sexuality, and oftentimes these sexual practices within the pre-tantric traditions involved rituals between a male and a female practitioner who would come together in sexual union, and then when they were finished, they would offer the combined fluids from the sexual act to a particular deity, often a goddess, who would then imbue them with magical powers. However, this particular form of sexual practice became internalized and refined and transformed into a methodology that was geared more towards spiritual liberation, especially in certain Kaula lineages like Pratyabhijna and other forms of Shakta Shaiva Tantra. In lineages where sexuality was used in a liberating spiritual practice, this energy of desire, of sexual desire, is understood as a contraction of Icha Shakti, which is the universal willpower which creates all universes. So this contracted energy of desire, this contracted Icha, can be sublimated and expanded to facilitate the expansion of consciousness and promote this sense of unity and love and wholeness. Some of the earliest written sources on tantric sexuality come from the Vajrayana tradition, which is tantric Buddhism. And especially there were writings about what's called Vajroli Mudra, which is a particular sexual practice in which the urethra is contracted in order to create suction to prevent semen from escaping during orgasm in men. And in women, this also facilitates a sublimation of the sexual energy. So in a tantric sexual relationship where this particular Vajroli Mudra would be practiced, both the man and the woman would have to master this particular technique in order for it to be carried out safely and properly, because the urethral suction causes a drain on the energy, the vital force of the partner. So if both people are trained in this, then they can feed on each other and exchange energy in a balanced way, whereas if only one person is trained in it, then they can end up draining and harming their partner. This Vajroli Mudra and other sexual techniques were later adopted by Hindu traditions, including Hatha Yoga and other traditions which were geared towards ascetics as well as householders. So for ascetics, this kind of urethral suction was used to preserve bindu, the subtle essence of sexual energy, and to sublimate that without sexual contact. And the same technique can be used by householders, by people in ethical sexual relationships, in order to facilitate sexual contact without loss of bindu, without loss of ojas, this sexual energy. And so that sexual energy can build up over time and be sublimated and facilitate an expansion of consciousness. This video and this program are just offering a brief introduction to tantric sexual practices. And at the time that I am filming this, I am currently training in a Tantra certification program, and will be able to teach more in-depth tantric sexual practices at a later time. And am planning to write another book and to create another video course on this topic specifically. So just to give a brief introduction to the kinds of practices that we'll be doing, a lot of the work has to be done by oneself on their own before coming together with a partner. The work in terms of cultivating this tantric sexual practice involves nervous system regulation, so being able to activate the parasympathetic nervous system to rest and relax, especially in response to pleasure, is extremely important, because the overexcitement that activates the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response in men, leads to early ejaculation, and in women can make it more difficult to orgasm. So a lot of the practices in the previous sections are actually helping to facilitate tantric sexuality by helping people to learn how to regulate their nervous systems in a non-sexual context. In addition to nervous system regulation, another aspect of tantric sexual practice involves pelvic floor exercises. Now, there are certain exercises which have become relatively well known in the modern day, like Kegels, for example, which are somewhat similar to the pelvic floor exercises that are used in tantric sexuality. However, there are some important differences. For example, in the particular form of tantric sexuality which I am training in, the Kegel contraction, which is very similar to Mula Bandha, is the same in terms of the muscular action, where it is contracting the pelvic floor, contracting the genitals and the anus, basically. And this contraction builds up the muscles in the genitals and in the anus and facilitates this sublimation of sexual energy. However, in contrast to Kegels, the way that the pelvic floor exercises are often taught in Tantra involves combining the breath with the pelvic contraction and release. So I'll walk you through a version of this in a moment. In addition, it's also important to note that only contracting and releasing the genitals is not really necessarily the best approach to pelvic floor exercises. You also have to do the reverse, which means pushing out, expanding through the genitals and the anus. It's like pushing out urine or feces or flatulence. So before doing these pelvic floor exercises, especially the reverse exercises where we're pushing out, it's important to ensure that your bladder and colon have recently been emptied. In addition to nervous system regulation and pelvic floor exercises to control the sexual response in both men and women, there is another element of tantric sexuality which involves contact with partners and intimacy, and we'll go into much more detail in this in a later program. However, just to give you some basic details, it involves really slowing down sexual encounters, taking your time, turning your partner on, savoring their body, appreciating them, letting them appreciate you, connecting through the eyes, breathing together, caressing the entire body, working from the outside in. So it begins with avoiding erogenous zones like the genitals or the breasts or the buttocks, and caressing the parts that are less sensitive first, very slowly touching the entire body of your partner, letting them touch you all over. And then gradually, after massaging and caressing from the outer parts like the arms, the shoulders, the legs, the feet, the head, you can begin to work your way towards more sensitive areas very, very slowly. And this is going to awaken all of the nerves in the body and facilitate a profound state of arousal in both partners, which leads to much more intense orgasms. This process of slowing down also makes it easier for male practitioners to preserve bindu, because the intense stimulation of a very fast-paced sexual encounter is much more likely to lead to premature ejaculation and ejaculation in general. And I hope to work with you again in the next program on tantric sexuality. Om.